Okay, so get this. We're diving into a story that's like wilder than any soap opera,
Oh.
a real life miracle pregnancy announcement straight out of ancient history.
And not just any pregnancy. This is Mary, the mother of Jesus, we're talking about.
Exactly. Today's deep dive. Well, we're looking at how Mary reacted to this crazy news. We've got this devotional excerpt focusing on Luke chapter 1, paired up with some verses from Matthew.
And our mission, to see what we can learn from how she responded to God, like straight up promising her this incredible and kind of terrifying thing.
Right. Imagine getting like not one, but TWO confirmations that you're carrying the Messiah. First, an angel pops in with the news, and then your cousin Elizabeth.
Oh yeah, who just so happens to be experiencing her own totally miraculous pregnancy. Divine intervention, you think.
No kidding. So Elizabeth's like filled with the Holy Spirit and basically calls Mary out, right? She says, "Blessed is she who has believed." And Mary, she just goes for it, bursts into this powerful song.
This song, they call it the Magnificat, is like a tapestry woven with all these Old Testament references and themes. It's a powerful declaration of God's power, his justice, and like a huge banner saying God keeps his promises.
Okay, but here's where it gets really cool for me. Mary's song focuses on how God lifts up the humble and feeds the hungry. It's almost like she's getting like a sneak peek into the kind of ministry Jesus will have, right?
Absolutely. Mary's words totally foreshadow Jesus' ministry, showing a continuity of purpose that connects their generations. Like she just gets it, God's character. It's almost as if that understanding is passed down from mother to son.
And there's this one line that just jumped out at me. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. Now, doesn't that sound familiar, like something Jesus himself said later on?
Totally. Matthew chapter 23, verse 12. Jesus says, "Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." Mary's words and Jesus' teachings, totally on the same wavelength, shows how much God cares about the humble and the oppressed.
It's incredible, these connections, right? And the devotional points out the timing of Mary's song is super important. It's right after Elizabeth confirms what God has promised, like, bam, overflow of gratitude.
Powerful, right?
Yeah.
It's not, oh no, what have I got myself into? It's pure praise, recognition of God's greatness.
So let's pause for a sec. This makes you wonder, when God reminds us of his promises, how do WE react? Are we like Mary, meeting those reminders with faith and, gratefulness? Or do we let doubt and fear take over?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can we cultivate that same humility and trust that Mary embodies? Because let's face it, her song wasn't for show. It was a genuine outpouring of her faith.
Exactly. It was about recognizing something way bigger than herself, God's faithfulness.
Right. And there's something else here. Mary's song isn't just about her personal gratitude. There's a social and political side to it, especially with the whole Roman occupation happening back then.
Wait, are you saying her song was like a form of resistance?
Well, think about those lines. He has brought down rulers from their thrones and lifted up the humble. Imagine hearing those words when you're living under Roman rule, desperate for freedom. Powerful stuff.
Whoa, so it's not just personal piety. She's making a statement, right? God's on the side of the oppressed, and he can challenge unjust systems.
Exactly. Mary's song is a call to action, urging people to align with God. Makes you think, how are WE responding to injustice today? Are we stuck in our little bubbles, or are we, actively trying to live out God's kingdom here and now?
It's a heavy question for sure. Easy to get caught up in our own lives and ignore all the injustices happening all around. But Mary's song, in its historical context, it's a wake-up call, isn't it?
It is. And faith isn't just about what we believe, it's about how we live.
Okay, so we've touched on the personal side of Mary's song and even the political. But let's not forget about Elizabeth. Her affirmation of Mary, that was huge, right?
Absolutely. Remember, she was filled with the Holy Spirit when she declared Mary blessed for believing God.
Yeah.
That kind of encouragement and support, especially in those early stages of Mary's, very unusual pregnancy. Invaluable.
Totally. Elizabeth, she gets it. It's like she provided this anchor for Mary when everything must have felt so overwhelming.
And don't forget, they were both going through these miraculous, impossible pregnancies. A shared experience, a powerful example of women, supporting each other in their faith.
Which brings us to a really important point, community. We're not meant to go through this faith journey alone. We need each other, right? To encourage, to pray for each other, and to celebrate God's faithfulness together.
It's beautiful. Even amidst those extraordinary circumstances, they needed each other. We all do. That human connection, it's essential.
So as we head into the next part of our deep dive, let's keep this whole community thing in mind. How can we be more intentional about, supporting each other in our faith? How can we make spaces where people feel safe to open up, share their struggles, and celebrate their victories?
It's so important. Just like Mary and Elizabeth, we need each other to navigate the ups and downs of faith and, well, life.
And imagine this, when we weave our individual threads of faith together, we create this beautiful and resilient tapestry that, reflects God's glory. But before we get into that, there's one more thing about Mary's story. I want to touch on the prophetic element.
Oh yeah, you're right. Her song wasn't just a beautiful expression. It was a glimpse into what was to come.
Exactly. Her words foreshadowed so much of Jesus' ministry, like his focus on humility, on justice, on God's concern for those who are often ignored or pushed aside.
It's almost as if she was given this incredible insight into the impact of what God was doing through her.
And that insight, well, it came from her deep understanding of the scriptures and her willingness to completely surrender to God's will, even when it seemed impossible.
Powerful message of hope. What do you say? God using ordinary people to do extraordinary things.
Absolutely. Mary, she wasn't royalty or a prophet, just a young woman from a humble background, and yet she's chosen to be the mother of the Messiah. It's empowering for all of us. Doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, God can use you to make a difference.
And so often, he chooses to work through those who humble themselves and are willing to follow his lead.
So as we transition to the final part of our deep dive, let's keep that in mind. Let's not underestimate God's power working through us, even in those little, seemingly insignificant moments.
Because, when we align ourselves with God, we become part of something so much bigger.
We become part of this incredible story of redemption, bringing hope and healing to a world that desperately needs it.
When we were talking about community, it makes me think about Mary's song in a whole new way. It's like even her song points to the need for, a support system.
I'm not sure I get you. What do you mean?
Well, remember that line where Mary praises God for filling the hungry with good things? It totally speaks to how much God cares for the poor and marginalized. But it also kind of hints at something deeper we're supposed to be part of, meeting those needs.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's personal, but it's also like a call to action. We got to do something.
Exactly. Faith, it's not a solo gig. It's about supporting each other, sharing what we have, working together to bring God's kingdom here on earth.
Makes sense. And that's what Elizabeth did for Mary.
Right.
Gave her that practical and emotional support when everything was so new and uncertain. Makes you think, what kind of community are WE building? Do people feel safe being real, sharing their struggles, celebrating their wins?
Such important questions. Just like Mary needed Elizabeth, we all need people who can, speak truth into our lives, remind us that God is faithful, and push us to grow in our faith.
It's wild how these ancient stories, written thousands of years ago, can still hit home today. Okay, maybe we're not dealing with Roman armies or miracle pregnancies, but we all have those moments of doubt, fear, and just feeling lost.
The Bible is amazing like that. These truths, they go beyond time and culture. It's like a guidebook for every generation.
And Mary's story, it gives us a blueprint, right? For dealing with those tough times. Faith, community, surrender, they're all there.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? Even in the middle of the unknown, even when we're feeling overwhelmed, God is working. He's got this bigger story going on, and we get to be a part of it.
Okay, but how do we actually apply this to our lives? It's one thing to admire Mary's, strength and faith, but how do we live it out in our daily grind?
That's where the rubber meets the road, as they say, moving from admiration to action.
Totally.
Yeah.
So where do we even start?
Well, I think it starts with that same humility Mary had, that surrender, recognizing that we're not in control, God is, and choosing to trust his plan, even when it's a total mystery.
So letting go of the need to control everything and leaning on God.
Exactly. Surrendering opens us up to God's power and grace in ways we can't even imagine.
But it's not just about sitting back and doing nothing, is it? Mary's song, it was bold. It was a call to get moving.
You got it. Surrender doesn't mean being passive. It means aligning our will with God's will, letting his purposes work through us.
So becoming God's instruments, right? Letting him work through us to build his kingdom right here, right now.
Exactly. And that's where community is so important. We're not meant to do this alone. We need each other to cheer each other on, support each other, and, keep each other on track.
It's kind of like a tapestry, right? We each bring our own unique gifts and experiences, and together it becomes this beautiful, strong thing, way more amazing than any of us could make on our own.
I love that. A perfect picture of Christian community love, grace, a shared purpose, all woven together.
Okay, so we've got surrender and community. But how do we take those ideas and actually put them into practice in our everyday lives? It's easy to talk about it, but how do we actually make a difference?
That's the challenge, right? Bridging that gap between the theory and actually doing something.
So how do we do it?
Well, I think it starts with paying attention, noticing the needs around us, the injustices that are happening, and how God might be calling us to step in.
Opening our eyes to the mess, the brokenness in the world, and asking, okay, what's my part in bringing healing and restoration?
Yeah, and that'll look different for everyone. For some, it might be volunteering at a soup kitchen or shelter. For others, maybe it's speaking out against injustice, fighting for those who don't have a voice.
Using our gifts, whatever they are, to serve others, make a difference wherever we are.
And remember, it doesn't have to be some huge, heroic thing. Sometimes the most powerful things we do are those everyday acts of kindness.
Like calling a friend who's going through a rough time or helping out a neighbor, just being intentional, looking for ways to love and serve, even when life is busy.
Those little acts of kindness, they can spread like wildfire. It's amazing how far love and hope can reach.
You know, it makes me think about what you said earlier about Mary's song having that, social and political edge to it. It wasn't just personal, it was about God caring about justice and wanting the oppressed to be lifted up.
Right. Her song pushes us to think hard about the systems that create inequality and injustice in the world. It's a call to be change makers, to build a more just and fair society.
So it's not enough to just help people out one by one. We have to tackle the bigger problems too.
Exactly. Supporting policies that are fair, tearing down structures that oppress people, that's part of it too.
That can feel really overwhelming though, right? Where do we even start with all that?
Oh, for sure. It can feel daunting. But remember, we're not alone in this. We have the Holy Spirit working in us and the strength of the whole church behind us.
So finding our place in that movement, connecting with others who are passionate about justice, and working together to bring about real, lasting change.
And even when we feel like our efforts are tiny, like a drop in the bucket, remember, God can use the smallest acts of obedience to do amazing things.
It's about being faithful in the little things, trusting that God will multiply our efforts and bring about justice and righteousness.
Beautiful. And as we work towards justice and reconciliation, remember to do it with humility and grace.
Oh yeah, that's key. We're all on this journey. We all make mistakes and have blind spots. We have to be willing to learn from each other, to listen to different perspectives, and to challenge our own assumptions.
And we have to give grace to those who are still learning and growing, just like we would want grace for ourselves.
So coming to these conversations with humility, with understanding, and with a willingness to build bridges, not walls.
That's where community shines again. Because in those authentic relationships, we can have those tough conversations, challenge each other's views, and grow together in our understanding of what's right and just.
It's about creating safe spaces where everyone feels heard, even when we disagree.
And real unity isn't about everyone thinking the same. It's about coming together because we love God and want His kingdom to be here on earth, just like it is in heaven.
I don't know about you, but I'm seeing Mary's story in a whole new light. It's not just about a miracle baby, it's about faith, courage, surrender, and how powerful it is to have people who support you.
And that story is still inspiring us today. It's calling us to step out in faith, to embrace what God has for us, and to work together to make His kingdom real here and now.
It reminds us that each of us has a part to play, and even the littlest things we do can have a big impact.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's hold on to this hope and remember that we're not alone. We've got each other, the Holy Spirit, and the power of God within us.
And like Mary, even the most ordinary people can do incredible things with God's help.
Beautifully said. All right, let's dive into the last part of our exploration.
Okay, so we've really unpacked Mary's story, right? Her song, the whole historical context, Elizabeth's role, the importance of having people around you who get it. But now I want to get real. What does this mean for us sitting here today?
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the ancient details and miss how it applies to our own lives.
Totally. Because Mary's situation, it was pretty unique, to say the least. But what she did, how she responded, that's timeless. We could all learn from that.
Think about it. We all encounter God's promises in our own ways.
Whether it's about healing, guidance, provision, or just feeling God's presence when things are rough.
And like Mary, we might struggle with those promises. They can feel huge, impossible even.
So how do we deal with that? What
Yeah.
can we learn from how Mary handled it that might help us in our own walk with God?
Well, one thing that really hits me is her trust in God. Like rock solid trust. Even when she didn't know how it would all work out, she just believed God would keep his word.
It's like she was saying, I don't have all the answers, but God's got this, and I trust him.
Exactly. It wasn't about seeing proof or having a step-by-step plan. It was a deep down knowing that God is who he says he is and that he doesn't break his promises.
And that kind of trust, it's so important, especially when we're going through hard times or things just don't make sense.
It is. But Mary shows us that faith isn't about knowing everything. It's about taking that leap of trust, even when we're scared or unsure.
And remembering that God sees the bigger picture, right?
Absolutely. We might not always get the why or how of God's plan, but we can choose to believe he's working it all out for our good.
So even when God's promises seem impossible or just too big to handle, we can choose to react with that same trust Mary had.
And we're not alone. Just like Elizabeth was there for Mary, we have each other. We have the Holy Spirit to guide us and the whole church family for support.
It's amazing, isn't it? We're meant to walk this journey of faith together, encouraging each other, pushing each other to grow, celebrating how God shows up in each other's lives.
And when we do that, when we surrender to God and embrace his promises, we become living proof of his power and grace.
So to wrap up this deep dive, I have one last challenge for you. What's one promise from God that you're holding on to right now?
And what's one small step you can take towards that promise today? It doesn't have to be huge. Even a tiny act of obedience can make a difference.
Remember, God sees your heart. Every step you take towards him matters.
Trust his timing, lean on his strength, and let his grace lead you.
And as you do that, I hope you experience that same joy and peace that Mary found when she said yes to God and embraced his incredible promise for her life.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a privilege exploring these amazing truths with you.
And may God bless you as you keep seeking him and discovering the beauty and power of his promises in your own life.